All right. Hey, everybody. Today I'm here to talk about the 2017 NA LCS Summer Split MVP award that went out. And I want to talk about this because some people started going back because it was such a close race and looking at all pro team votes, stuff like that. And I got a few messages about how my all pro team had some incongruencies with my MVP team. And I want to set that straight and say, they're different awards, different criteria, and that's mostly what this video is going to be about. So these awards are to recognize outstanding performance, but they're also there to generate conversation. That doesn't mean you vote in a controversial way to get people to talk about it. Instead, you vote off of your criteria and you vote and explain it, in my mind. I want people to explain their votes, talk a little bit about them, and say, okay, this is why. That's what I really like about the generation of conversation is people have their subjective criteria, and then they're going to be need to explain it because not everybody thinks the same way. So I'm also here to give some insight into that, which I really think is something that a lot of people should be doing. I think it's fantastic. That's one of the things that I like listening to is why somebody values this, doesn't value this, values this over that, and how they got to the conclusions they got to. Um, so before we start talking about my incongruency in my vote, I do want to say, as you can see, I'm not in Boston. I'm in my room. And the reason I'm here is because I was sick for my flight, and the team was able to cover for me and told me to focus on my recovery. So, huge shout out to them. I'm getting better, but I'm not fully there yet. And they said instead of risking the flight, which is going to lower your immune system even more, uh, they can carry the extra weight. And that's what I love about this team is now I'm not focused on I'm letting them down. It's more focus on recovery, and I wish I were there, right? Because it just looks like such a kick-ass show to be a part of. They've killed it. I can't wait for the finals tomorrow. Um, but it just looks so kick-ass when everybody on production, on the broadcast team, on the casting team steps up, and it just feels like nothing was lost, nothing's going on, and it happens with almost everybody. When somebody's sick, it's still a well-oiled machine. It's going to keep going. So I love that about this team. It's incredible to be a part of. They're the real MVPs. So anyway, let's talk about who actually got MVP and why people are messaging me about this. So we're looking at the All-Pro team first. Jensen is my number 1 mid laner, and then Bjergsen is my number 2 mid laner. Then my MVP, I actually swapped it. Bjergsen is my number 1 MVP, and Jensen is my number 2 MVP. And so I got quite a few questions about how can Bjergsen be the best player in the league when he's not even the best mid laner? And I'm here to tell you easily. So let's start talking about the All-Pro votes. So for me, the All-Pro team is not mini MVP. If it was, there would be a lot of changes, right? I originally thought someday would get it, but because it's not mini MVP in my mind, it's its own award, and this is strictly based off of your performance and your play from only this split. I don't care if you're a choker in the past. I don't give a shit if you played really well in 2016, 2017 spring. None of that. I don't care if you choke in high-pressure situations. Get that out of here. That doesn't matter. It's only the 2017 summer regular split. I don't care about your past at all. So, with that in mind, strictly play. I had criteria for each lane. I won't go into those right now. And it takes a little bit too much time. And then I feel like I had to break everything down and how I shifted people around. Anyway, second thing about the All-Pro vote that's important is I put no intangibles as a factor here. Why? Because I felt as though intangibles do not make you a better top laner, jungler, mid laner, AD carry, or support. They do not affect your performance or your play in a way that we can actually evaluate without much speculation. So, for example, being a shot caller on a winning team did not get you extra points. Being a shot caller on a losing team did not lose you points. Being a leader didn't get you anything. Because, like I said, these things, these qualities do not necessarily make you a better X, Y, or Z. For example, if I'm an 80, and it punishes everybody else if you consider it. If I am an 80 carry shot caller, do I now get bonus points over all other 80 carries when that is not a requirement of the role? Do I get bonus points here when I'm not being compared to other shot callers? Right? Because it just seems like it just gets added on, right? For example, Adrian, he's my number 3 support because I look strictly at play. If I'm looking at shot calling, I'd bring Aframu up there, but I'm not. And another reason why I felt like you couldn't really include this is we are evaluating 15 names onto paper and putting them in a certain order. But it could be up to 30 as you consider 4, 5, and 6 for each position. Do we know everybody, all 100 people in the league's criteria? Would you have to consider them for the award? Do you consider their intangibles because you can't know all of them, right? You don't know. In fact, like we didn't know that Alltech was the late game, mid late game shot caller for Dignitas until very recently, until after these awards, right? But we don't know those things. So working with incomplete knowledge, I said this is crap and just threw it out. Said I'm not going to try to work with that and give people points for us knowing that they have intangibles versus not knowing. So I threw that out the window. There's just too many people, and you just can't know everybody. So why include it at all? Because it becomes a lot of disruption. And for example, if you're a better AD carry player, but I'm an AD carry shot caller and I'm a little worse than you, I think you'd be upset if I ended up being over you on a list that's supposed to judge you by your skill, right? I think that's unfair. So I think that these things like shot calling and leadership are not requirements of the roles. Instead, I had other requirements and criteria that I judged them by. So now let's move to MVP. I included intangibles here because it's the most valued. It's the most valuable player. I'm looking at your value, what you bring to a team. This includes your performance on the Rift, of course, but also what you bring to the team off the Rift, even sometimes leadership on the Rift, right? So it's all the aspects of the holistic package of the player. The most valuable player is them with their personality. It's going to include everything. So the reason I included intangibles here is it just made logical sense. Now, the argument I said to exclude intangibles if there's too many people to consider for every single role, here I feel like it becomes more fair because now you aren't comparing roles against each other, you're comparing across roles, right? I have to compare the support to a top laner, right? I have to compare this guy who's a support to, a mid laner. And so it's not so much like a direct comparison. You have to be able to extrapolate a lot and you have to include everything. So when we look at things like MVP votes, and there's less people here, right? I talked about like how I'm going to evaluate like 30 to 115 people ish for All Pro. Here, you only really have to talk about 6 or 7 and know their intangibles. And because these are MVP type players, we're naturally going to know more about them and more of what they bring to the table. There's less conversations to have as well where I can be like, hey, tell me about this player on your team. What do they bring, right? And you can like ping people about it instead of having to be like, oh, tell me about all 10 people on your roster. What do they bring? So these are like easier conversations to have so you can include intangibles here. We know what Bjergsen brings to a team. We know what Jensen brings to a team. We know what Olay brings to a team, even Smithy, right? So we have all this information on these players that are being considered for top positions that I think you include it because it's also part of their value. So let's get into the specific case of Jensen versus Bjergsen. So I hate the words best and better because people are going to say, oh, you think Bjergsen is better than Jensen? Or you think Jensen's the best mid laner? Or Bjergsen's the best player? Like, in short, yes. But in not so short, it's not black and white like that, right? This vote was incredibly close. Like even going to the vote for the All Pro team, it's 92 points to 94. Literally one person changes their vote from a first to second for Bjergsen and puts first to second for Jensen and swaps them in Bjergsen's first. They're both tied at 93 points. It's incredibly close. Saying one is better than the other is not always going to be necessarily that black and white. So, like, put it in some context here, I used a rating scale, and I ended up putting Jensen in the All Pro team as a 9.6 mid laner. Right? Incredibly good, had a lot of the aspects that I was looking for, and he's fantastic. Bjergsen, a 9.4, 0.2 in terms of what their play looked like during the regular season of 2017 summer. So a 0.2 difference here between the two. You would be right to say that Jensen was considered better or the best on that scale, right? But the fact that like the next mid laner is pretty far down there on that rating scale, we're looking at 2 of the best in my mind. Because it's so close, days matter, small things matter, like just performance from performance basis. So I think it's disingenuous to say like this person is better than this. Technically you're right, but I feel like it paints it too black and white for my taste. So yes, Jensen played mid lane. He performed better than Bjergsen by 0.2, right? Put him number 1 versus 2 in my all pro ballot, but it doesn't show you how close it was. So now let's talk about how Bjergsen ended up passing Jensen here when I included intangibles. So the intangibles get thrown in, and we know what Jensen brings to the team. He's not a big communicator. He's not a big shot caller. He likes to focus on his play, and that's why his play looks so good, right? And that's the advantage that he has over Bjergsen in the All-Pro team, is that he gets to focus on his play, right? He gets to focus on those things. Bjergsen has to juggle a little bit more, and that's where he makes up for it with the intangibles and how he gets rewarded for it in the voting system. But like I said, Jensen doesn't bring too much more than just like advantages in lane, being a really solid player, those types of things. But Bjergsen gets to bring a whole bunch more. Bjergsen is a known leader. He inspires those around him with his devotion and with his drive to play, to practice. Everybody else talks about how much Bjergsen plays that they feel like they need to play. I value that. The motivation is huge. People talk about things like having a diverse play style kind of goes into play, but I would say like being one of the most banned players in the league is indicative of the pressure that you put, and then you have high communication and shot calling. Bjergsen has 4 very distinct things over Jensen that he brings to the table, and he only had to compensate a 0.2 difference in terms of the play. So if those 4 things are able to bring him up 0.3, then he would get the MVP #1 slot. And that's what happened with me, is that he easily was able to compensate that difference when you include the intangibles in there. So in kind of in summary here, All Pro is not MVP, right? It is not your value. For me, it is your performance on the Rift. It is strictly your play with no intangibles. What do we see? The eye test is going to be king here. Second, MVP is not the all-pro, all-pro. It's not you take the all-pro team and you vote between these guys, right? It's not that. It's not even close to that, right? You're already voting for like Jensen, which could have been number 2, right? You could be voting him as number 1 or number 2, right? It's not the all-pro, all-pro. MVP is the most valuable player, and that's why I included intangibles in there. They are different awards, and I feel like they need to be treated differently, or else why don't we just do MVP per lane, right? And that's what this is. The most valuable laner for each lane. I think they're 2 very distinct awards for a reason, and I think that the distinction I've made is the All-Pro is who has been playing and performing well. I'll put it this way. Yeah. The All-Pro is your performance. Who has performed the best? Who has played the best? And then the MVP is who is the best player. And you take them as an entire holistic sense of a person. That's the player. You have to consider everything. And then the All-Pro is you consider just their play. So hope that makes sense. I hope that clears some things up as well. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Tell me what you think. And of course, like I said, it's all about the discussion. I want to hear the opinions, and I want to hear what you guys think. So have a good one and enjoy the finals.